Britain's Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has declared that she's going to unleash the most sweeping asylum reforms in a generation, copying Denmark, the country with the most draconian policies in Europe. The media have gone into a frenzy. The left are in a panic about cruel and inhumane treatment. The right are concerned that Labour might pull the carpet from under them on immigration. Who's right? Well, I've spent 5 years writing and lecturing about the Danish policies, urging the government to adopt them. As you'll find out, these policies don't go far enough at all, and this is just another case of Labour talking tough and doing little. Hello, I'm Rafe Hagel-Mancu. I was delighted when news first broke that the Home Secretary was going to introduce Danish-style policies to tackle Britain's broken asylum system. I've been advocating for the adoption of Danish policies for years. Frustrated that it's taken so long, I was happy to see some steps in the right direction. However, a closer inspection of Shabana Mahmood's policies reveals that they are little more than a damp squib. All talk and no trousers. What she has achieved in essence is what we call a PSYOPs, a psychological operation, which has convinced many people in the media and on the right and amongst the voting public that Labour is finally getting serious. The reality is, I'm afraid to say, very different than that. There's no deterrent still, no policies to detain or deport. These policies will have very little effect on stopping the small boats. The policies are better than nothing at all, but they don't go anywhere near far enough. At its core, these new policies are not so much about tackling the asylum system, they're more about a political strategy to undermine reform. On the positive side, what they do achieve, however, is they have managed to move the Overton window on asylum to the right, because even though it is all talk and no trousers, that talk is important, because now that Labour is openly discussing these sorts of tough measures, the public will be better prepared now to have serious conversations about the even tougher policies, indeed some might say controversial policies, that Britain does need to adopt. In other words, the Danish policies and other policies that Mahmood has ignored. Denmark has been led by a left-wing Social Democratic Party for several years now, and the Danish Prime Minister, who is a former trade unionist and a full-fledged member of the left, has said things and come up with policies which, had they been said by anybody on the right, would have led to her being denounced by the left as far-right, even as a Nazi. But because of her left-wing credentials, they've been fettered in their inability to call her out for what they see as a lurch to the right. But what she achieved in Denmark was quite remarkable. The right in Denmark were a rising force. The populist right threatened the ability of the left to form a government, and by adopting the policies of the right, by adopting hardline, I would say common sense policies on asylum and on immigration, the left in Denmark were able to completely nobble the right and essentially keep them out of office. That seems to be a strategy that Labour now wishes to adopt in order to tackle the threat, the existential crisis posed to the party by reform. Only by outflanking reform, or at least meeting reform head-to-head on all policy issues relating to immigration, do they think they will have any chance of trying to undermine reform's huge and growing lead. It's worked very well in Denmark. If you can see here, this shows how popular Western European leaders are in their own countries. This is from April 2025. And as you'll see, the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, is far ahead, the most popular leader in Europe. Of course, far ahead of Keir Starmer and of Emmanuel Macron. Should be said, Keir Starmer is even lower now than he was here in April. And think tanks and others have basically pointed to how this general election in 2019 led to the fall of the far right. If you look here, you can see the red line at the top. This is the left-wing Social Democrats Party, which is the government, and you can see what a huge lead they continue to have over all other parties. Their opposition is this little yellow line at the bottom here. This is the party that was once riding high in the polls, but since the last few years has basically been almost unable to make a blip in the polls. The way that a left-wing prime minister was able to successfully sell this policy in Denmark should be a lesson to all left-wing parties. The Labour Party hasn't understood it in these terms. The Danes are very proud of their welfare system. This is one of the world's happiest countries. It ranks in the top 10 happiest countries in the world. And a lot of that is because of the way that it looks after all of those who are in need. We all know, of course, it's a very successful social democratic state with a very high level of quality of life. And in essence, the Danish Prime Minister offered the Danish people a choice between two types of compassion. You can either have a strong welfare state looking after your own people, or you can have a generous asylum system basically supporting foreigners coming into your country. And the Danes were presented with that binary choice. And unsurprisingly, they prioritized keeping their welfare state. And so by phrasing the terms in those binary issues, Denmark was able to rewire the migration debate. We've had none of that from Labour, none of that phrasing, none of that way of saying you can either look after your own or we can look after foreigners. Mahmoud hasn't rewired the debate. She's just been tinkering with some of the circuits. There are many ways in which Mahmoud has not adopted the real core Danish policies. And when she has adopted some policies, they've been watered down and effectively made ineffective. For one thing, offshore processing. This is something that Denmark legislated for. This is something that Mahmoud and the Labour Party have utterly rejected. Before Britain even considered the Rwanda plan, Denmark was talking about offshore processing in Africa, and it's passed legislation to that effect. Now, they haven't sent anyone to Rwanda yet, but the reason for that is because the European Union itself is now looking into the whole concept of processing illegal migrants and asylum seekers in third countries overseas. So you have Denmark and the EU considering offshore processing centres. None of that is being considered by the Labour Party. There is no deterrent. The idea in Europe is if you arrive here, you will be detained and deported. That's a deterrent. What we're saying here is we won't process anyone. We'll have return hubs. So you'll still be able to come here and live at our expense whilst we process you. If you're rejected, then you'll be sent abroad to a return hub. That policy shows the marked difference in thinking between Denmark and Britain. Denmark also has a policy, of course, where asylum seekers, if they ever want to get permanent residency status in Denmark, they have to have worked for several years in full-time work before they qualify for permanent residence. And they must demonstrate complete economic self-sufficiency. No welfare claims can be made if you are ever hoping to become a permanent resident there. What Mahmoud has done is said, we're going to have a 20-year wait. So you'll have to wait 20 years if you're illegal before you can get benefits, for example. But there's a loophole here people haven't spoken about. There's another option where you can have 10 years if you arrive here legally, or if you go on to this new work and study route. So if you arrive here illegally, yes, you'll have to wait 20 years to get benefits, unless you go on this work and study route, in which case you can qualify many, many years earlier. Again, Denmark uses employment and self-sufficiency as the core integration test. In the UK, Labour does not do that. Language and civic tests. Denmark demands a huge level of proficiency in the English language to demonstrate integration. To stay permanently in Denmark, refugees must pass demanding language exams, B1 for residency, B2, this sort of GCSE A-level tests, Whereas for the Labour Party, there's only a modest language requirement for the faster route, not for settlement itself. Denmark mandates integration through speaking the language. In the UK, it's only an incentive. Confiscating valuables, you may have heard about. In Denmark, for example, there's a jewelry law. So if you arrive as an illegal immigrant, you will have your assets confiscated. Not your wedding ring necessarily, but anything else you have which is over a certain value will be taken off you and confiscated. In Britain, they have been reluctant to do that, reluctant to take any item of jewelry. Instead, if you are seen to have a scooter or a car whilst living in Britain, those will be confiscated. Well, yes, obviously, those should be confiscated with the funds going to look after you. But again, this is more about the symbolism of these actions. And this is what Labour has failed to understand. They've again taken the knee to their backbenchers who say that it's cruel to take someone's jewelry. It's the messaging which is the key point here, trying to create a genuinely hostile environment. What the Danes have done is to basically say, look, Denmark is so unpleasant, so unwelcoming, stay in Germany, stay in France, go wherever you can. And yet again, the Labour Party is saying, well, actually, we are a welcoming country. We won't act so unpleasantly or unkindly towards you. That's not the way you deter people from coming. One of Denmark's most important measures, which we have not really considered properly, is family reunification. Denmark intentionally puts up great barriers and has some of the toughest policies on family reunification in Europe. You have to wait 3 years before you apply. Both partners must be at least 24 years of age. You cannot have been in receipt of welfare for the last 3 years. If you are applying to bring your spouse or a member of your family over, you have to demonstrate integration in areas of language, in work history, in your income levels. And if you have any criminal conviction, then you are barred from family reunification for a decade. Now, human rights bodies, the ECHR and others have said these are outrageous policies which conflict with the ECHR's right to family life. Denmark simply shrugs its shoulders. This is one of the reasons we don't actually even need to leave the ECHR. Denmark has shown the way to do it. The ECHR doesn't have a police force that can come and arrest the Danish Prime Minister. Denmark is a sovereign country. If the ECHR doesn't like what Denmark does, Denmark just says, so what? What are you going to do about it? All that's happening in the Labour Party's policies is that it will restrict reunification by applying the UK's income requirement of under £30,000. None of those additional hurdles that Denmark has put in place is Mahmoud doing. The ghetto laws are something which really are tough in Denmark, and there's been no mention of that from Labour. In fact, the Labour Party is not brave enough to touch this issue. Denmark designates certain areas as being non-Western, and that non-Western means ethnic minorities. And these are segregated communities, ghettos, as they are called in Denmark, which are parallel societies whose daily lives pass with little or no interaction with wider society. These are areas with high criminality, low education, high unemployment, antisocial behavior, criminality. And if those criteria are met, the Danish government can actually bulldoze these ghettos, bulldoze these council estates, bulldoze these segregated communities, evict people, bring in other people to create more of a mix, so you don't have everybody on benefits. You have actual priority given to people who are British, people who are in work, trying to break up this idea that you have these completely separated enclaves. If you commit a crime and you live in one of these ghettos, your conviction, your sentence will be doubled. So you'll get double the sentence because you lived in one of these ghettos. And not only will you be evicted from your social housing, your entire family will be evicted from their social housing. And you'll have no right to bring family reunification over as well if you live in one of these ghettos. Now, those are hugely illiberal policies according to the standards of the left, and the Labour Party simply isn't brave enough to deal with those, deeming them to be incompatible with so-called British values. But that is a very, very strong message being sent out by the Danish government. The Danes also, and imagine this, a left-wing social democratic prime minister, former trade unionist, who has said that the ambition of her government is to have zero asylum seekers. Now imagine anyone in this country, imagine even a conservative, let alone a Labour prime minister, saying that they wanted zero asylum seekers coming to Britain. My own solution is simply this: to rewrite, or to get rid of the United Nations 1951 Charter on Refugees and replace it with a new charter which says that asylum seekers, refugees, must be rehoused within their continent of origin. So if you're fleeing Sudan, you go elsewhere in Africa. If you're fleeing Syria or Palestine, you go elsewhere in the Middle East. You're fleeing Vietnam, you go somewhere in Asia. You're fleeing Ukraine, yes, you can come to Europe. Because ultimately, it's culture and it's religion that are the key factors to successful integration. If you are in a Christian country, Christian refugees will feel much happier. If you're a Muslim refugee, you'll be much happier in a Muslim country with similar practices, similar customs, similar habits. Likewise, of course, the key goal must be to return refugees to where they came from. That's far more likely to happen if you are living close to your homeland rather than thousands of miles away in another country. Temporary visas, again, another policy which is quite long. We've been waiting for it for a very long time. Germany and Denmark have had this temporary visas for a long time. Why it's taken British governments so long to understand that asylum is supposed to be a temporary option, I do not understand. But that is one welcome development from the government. Now, as I've said, this idea of having zero refugees in Denmark has meant that Denmark has refused UN resettlement quotas. The UN sets out quotas. You must take this many refugees annually. Denmark has simply refused to do that, becoming the only country to do that in complete contravention of the UN Charter on the UN Refugee Convention. Again, the Danish Prime Minister happy to stand up to the ECHR, happy to stand up to the European Union, happy to stand up to the UN and the UNHCR. And Labour's approach is completely opposite. Labour and Mahmoud are emphasising more safe and legal routes, more community sponsorship, special routes for talent and for students. So again, this is not about lowering the numbers. This is about fewer illegal migrants, but basically saying, well, we can still accept you from other routes. No, we need to have a policy of saying either zero asylum seekers like the Danes, or else only European refugees should be able to come over to Britain. Denmark also has departure centres. So if you fail in your application, if you are rejected, you are immediately sent to a departure centre, which is really a detention centre, with very harsh conditions. You have no right to work, no cash benefits. You have to sign in 3 times a week to show that you're there. And if you miss signing one of those, you go to jail straight away, and you're separated from other members, adult members of your family. And people who live in these detention centres call them prisons. And discomfort is the point. This is a place designed to be unpleasant so that you will voluntarily leave. And if you do buy your own ticket to go back to where you came from or to go to another country, then Denmark will actually help you and will give you some money to leave. That's a great policy. Firstly, of course, we should be emptying all the hotels, all the private accommodation, putting all illegal migrants into refugee camps. We did that after the Second World War with the Poles. We had 250,000 Poles living happily for over a decade in resettlement camps. There's no reason why our young fighting men that we have in these hotels and private accommodation can't go into the same places. Again, this is about creating genuinely hostile environments. A 2-star or a 1-star hotel in Britain is luxury for many of these people coming from the most desolate countries in the world. So what about the policies that Mahmoud has adopted? We've spoken about the ones she hasn't adopted, the real meat of Denmark's success. Well, look, there are 3 key takeaways from the policies which Mahmoud has outlined. Firstly, extending the wait for settlement for 20 years. As I've said, it sounds tough, but this new work and study route provides a faster alternative. So the deterrent effect in terms of stopping people coming into this country is very low. It's also the case that, yes, the Labour government has said that it's going to stop benefits. But if it stops benefits to asylum seekers, what's going to happen is that the local councils are then going to have to actually look after these asylum seekers. So this is just a question of pushing the burden away from the central government onto local councils. And I don't think people understand that. If the Labour government just removes benefits, the councils are going to have to take up the task. So there needs to be a real policy announcement here that councils themselves will not be providing benefits either. Now, a good thing that Mahmoud had introduced is the willingness to use visa sanctions against countries that refuse to take back their citizens who've come over here. In other words, stopping their high-profile figures, their politicians and others from getting visas to come into the country, but maybe having a blanket ban and not granting any visas to people coming from these countries. That's the sort of tough measures we want to see being taken. But so far, she's only targeted very small countries like Namibia. The big question is, what do you do about places like Nigeria, like Pakistan, and like India? If Britain tries to put sanctions on visas from those countries, that will be a major diplomatic test of the mettle of the Labour government. And again, in terms of sending people away, there's no commitment at all to deport all illegal entrants. You know, the Tories and Reform have said that they want every illegal migrant deported. They essentially want mass deportations. Labour still won't commit to that, even under these Danish policies. That's a huge failing. We should be, of course, doing something like the Australians did with the island of Nauru and immediately detaining and deporting either back to where they came from or to an offshore processing centre. They're also saying that AI recognition is going to be used to prove the test of someone's face, essentially giving ChatGPT a customs and an immigration hat. That doesn't seem to be a very effective way when we know that there are much better ways of determining someone's age physically. And then, of course, the expansion of safe and legal routes, which is essentially saying you can still come to this country, but just by a different way than crossing over the channel. So all taken all together, this is very much thin gruel, things that sound tough, but don't have the backbone and don't have the necessary measures which have any chance of significantly stopping the small boats and solving our asylum crisis. The key thing that Denmark was doing is it reframed the debate in terms of protecting Denmark's welfare state and the quality of life of its citizens. It creates a philosophy of a genuine hostile environment based on coercion, on deterrence, and being willing to confront international bodies like the ECHR, like the EU, and like the UN. And Mahmoud and the Labour Party aren't doing anything like that. However, what they have done is they've shown that they are now finally realistic. They have finally understood the threat, and they are being more honest and open about this than they ever have before. Of course, getting the wrath of their backbenchers. And you can just see here, again, here we have Mahmoud talking tough, put UK safety before migrants' rights, automatic handouts for asylum seekers to finally end a benefits crackdown. This is a psychops. This is a way to essentially try to get the public to believe you are being tougher than any other government has been. And when you see the hysteria from the left, here you have Richard Bergen saying essentially,
we've got an immigration minister tweeting deport, deport, deport. And now this policy announcement, which I'm afraid scrapes the bottom of the barrel.
And Absana Begum saying that this is cruelty to appease the far right. You have Nadia Whittome saying the government should be ashamed that its policies are being cheered on by Tommy Robinson and Reform. And we see there's a growing revolt from the Labour Party. And places like Novara Media saying Labour's Denmark-inspired asylum plan is landing with the far right. And even the Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has said that the Home Secretary was brave when talking about these policies. This has been a great political strategy by Labour to make it appear that they are extremely right-wing on these issues. As I hope I've explained to you, the reality is far from the truth. We need a deterrent, we need to adopt all of Denmark's policies, and we need to go further. We need to embrace a policy of completely rewriting the UN Convention on Refugees if we are to have any hope of taking control of our broken asylum system. Until next time, I'm Rafe Hadel Manku.